Washington Journal continues.
And last month, private sector employment hit a milestone when U.S. businesses finally regained the number of jobs that had been lost during the 2008 Great Recession. Joining us now to offer their take on the best way to move forward with job creation are Ross Eisenbray of the Economic Policy Institute and Daniel Mitchell of the Cato Institute. And first, Mr. Mitchell, how much should policymakers be celebrating the fact that private sector jobs are now back to 2008 levels 6 years later?
Well, they should celebrate in that they're not below 2008, but that is a very low bar to clear. Normally, when you have a recovery from a downturn, and we've theoretically been in a recovery now, we're well into our fifth year, you should be way, way above. And if you look at the average of all post-World War II recessions, this is a very, very weak jobs performance we've had in the last several years. That being said, I'm glad we've at least gotten to 2008. I just wish we got there a lot sooner.
Ross Eisenbray, a milestone worth celebrating?
Well, I agree with Dan that this is nothing much to celebrate. It's better than, still being a few million jobs down. But because population has grown over this time, we should be 6 or 8 million jobs ahead of where we are now.
And that's the question. How is the Great Recession still impacting the unemployment situation? What is the jobs world that we're living in today compared to what we were living in 2008?
I think the biggest problem is that the federal government has shrunk its budget. The budget deficit fell from 10% of GDP in 2009 to 3% last year, and it continues to fall, where the deficit keeps shrinking. Congress has engaged in austerity in a way that has really cut off economic growth, and there's probably nothing more important to the jobs picture than that.
Daniel Mitchell, your thoughts? Do you agree?
Well, good. We get to disagree already because what Ross is doing is giving the Keynesian argument that somehow government pump priming, deficit spending is good for the economy, and I just don't think that's true. I think Obama's stimulus failed. If you ask me what the most important job number to look at, it's not so much the unemployment rate, it's the employment population ratio. For much of recent decades, we've been averaging between 62 and 63% of the working age population employed. And now we've been stuck down at around, 58.5% or so. That's pretty weak. It's not just, it went down for the recession and now it's bouncing back up. It went down and it's been sort of stuck there, flatlining like a heartbeat that doesn't exist anymore on a monitor.
And are these historic lows? How does this compare throughout U.S. history?
After World War II, as we saw women coming into the workforce, we saw sort of a long-run trend of the employment population ratio increasing, and then it sort of got up into that low 60s level, and it seemed to be stable, because obviously not everyone who's working age wants to work or needs to work, so it's not like we want that to be, 90 or 95. There's not some magic number, but to see the number go from 62 to 63 down to between 58 and 59 and stick there when there's no reason why we might think that there's a big change in the preferences of the workforce, I think that's a sign of a lot of labor that's no longer being productively utilized in the economy. And I agree with Ross. I mean, we are, 6, 7, 8 million jobs behind where we should be if this was a normal recovery. Where we'll fight is, what's the way to get out of that? What's the reason why the jobs are low? I think it's because government is too big and it's too much of a burden on the private sector. And Ross, of course, will say government should do more. So we'll fight it out.
So lay it out. Better utilizing that labor force that you're talking about. What is the role of government? Does it have any role of government here, in your opinion?
Government has a role. It's to provide the right framework, the rule of law and property rights, and to have a system where the tax and regulatory burden is sensible, where government spending isn't diverting too many resources from the productive sector of the economy. That kind of system then enables the private sector to flourish. But here's probably my #1 message that I would give to every viewer out there. Businesses aren't charities. Businesses will create jobs when they think, we'll hire this person and that'll help us make a little bit extra money. Well, if taxes and spending and regulation are so high, it makes it more difficult for businesses to make that trade-off and decide, yes, let's hire a new person. I don't want government to be small just as some ideological mission. Yeah, I'm a libertarian. I like small government. But practically speaking, on job creation, I want government to be small so businesses have an incentive to create jobs because they don't do it out of the goodness of their hearts. They do it to increase their bottom line.
Ross Eisenbray, your #1 message here.
Well, I think that the government needs to do much more than it's doing. The notion that regulation is somehow choking off American business, I think, is nonsensical. Every survey shows that American business itself rates the American regulatory system as making it easy to start new businesses. We're on world rankings, we're still ranked #1 among large nations in terms of the ease of starting a business or maintaining a business. Our regulations are all cost beneficial. Every one of them that gets through the regulatory process ends up helping the economy more than it hurts. So the notion that regulation is a problem is just wrong. What we need is primarily things like fixing our trade balance. We have a huge trade deficit, which means we are not producing things for our own market and for the world market. On balance, we're borrowing from the rest of the world, having them produce for us, which leaves our people unemployed. So that probably is the #1 big ticket item for the government to address.
Mr. Mitchell, I believe, brought up the stimulus effort. We're a little past 5 years since that $800 billion stimulus effort. Is it time for another round of stimulus?
It was time for another round in 2009, actually. The stimulus that we had was too small and too focused on tax cuts. And if we had done more and if we'd sustained it, we'd be in much better shape. We're making serious mistakes right now, for example, not renewing unemployment insurance. That will cost jobs. Obviously, it's terrible for the long-term unemployed, but it also will cost jobs. We should be doing huge infrastructure spending. The McKinsey Global Institute, which is, a business advisor, suggests that we should be spending 1% of GDP more each year. That's about $1.5 trillion. I'm sorry, it's $150 billion more each year than we're spending now. And that would put people to work on roads and bridge projects, sewage projects, repairing schools. We have a huge infrastructure deficit, and addressing that would put people back to work.
And want to get to some of these issues during the course of our hour-long discussion as we talk about how best to create jobs in the U.S. We're joined by Ross Eisenbray of the Economic Policy Institute and Daniel Mitchell of the Cato Institute. But before we open up the phones, Daniel Mitchell, I wanted to get you to respond to some of the stimulus efforts that Mr. Eisenbray was talking about.
I think Ross is being a government junkie. We took the hit of whatever we want to call it, the heroin of big government back in 2009. That didn't work. We got deeper in debt. The burden of government spending increased. The job creation numbers never materialized in the way the White House promised. And now Ross wants to go down the same path. But what I would say to your viewers is, don't believe Ross, but don't believe me either. Just look around the world. If Keynesian economics worked, if big government was the solution, then why are countries like France and Italy and Greece in permanent economic stagnation? And why are small government jurisdictions like Hong Kong and Singapore, why do they routinely, year after year, decade after decade, enjoy 5 to 6% growth? The world is a laboratory, and I think that laboratory shows that the nations with the biggest governments do the worst. Now, I want to get out some humility here. There are lots of factors that determine economic performance, and I think this is another area where Ross and I might agree. There's rule of law and property rights, trade policy, regulatory policy, monetary policy, fiscal policy. I'm a fiscal policy economist, so sometimes I get tunnel vision and I want to say taxes and spending matter more than anything. But no, there are all these other factors. So you want to make sure you're looking at all the things in your economy and trying to get the policies right. One policy is never going to be a silver bullet. I might like to have a flat tax. I might like to have less government red tape. But you got to look at the whole panoply of government.
And we're opening up all of government to our viewers, and Ross Eisenbray and Daniel Mitchell as well, to ask your questions. Give your comments on how best to create jobs moving forward. Our phone lines are open. Republicans can call at 202-585-3881. Democrats, 202-585-3880. Independents, 202-585-3882. And if you're outside the U.S., it's 202-585-3882. 3883. As we said, some of those headlines from earlier this month with that March job report, private employment slowly reclaiming its pre-downturn peak. Here is a look at the change in employment from January 2008 through the beginning of 2014. The U.S. finally reclaiming those private sector jobs lost in the Great Recession. Jody writes in on our Twitter page, celebrating getting back to the '08 levels is better than nothing. Where are these job creators? I've heard of them since 2008, and I haven't seen them. We'll be taking your tweets, your emails as well, and our phone lines are open. We'll start with June calling in from Wisconsin on our line for Independence. June, good morning.
Hi. You know, it's absolutely amazing. Those members in Congress who refuse to pass the American Jobs Act, those are government jobs that they are holding, yet they won't pass this act so that the government can help people get to work, because everybody knows this. Government workers spend their money. And when they spend their money, well, the companies they're spending that money on hire new people to handle all the business that the government workers are creating by spending all that government money. And it is clearly an effort by the Republican-controlled Congress, let's face it, to make sure that President Obama has the worst possible job creation record ever. It is so obviously political, and it is hurting the American people. And I'm very disappointed that all of those Congress people who are holding government jobs, who say the government can't create jobs. It's a total fallacy. Think about all the time the economy has soared. It's been with the help of government-created jobs, hiring American people to get paychecks from the government to spend the money on the American economy. It's a cycle.
Ross Eisenbray, I saw you shaking your head during some of those comments.
Well, we have lost from 2008. We're about 400 to 500,000 public jobs lower than we were, because state governments, local governments have been cutting back, partly because the federal support that they got was cut back, and that, you know, it isn't because there isn't a need. It isn't because we don't need school teachers or daycare programs or after-school programs or first responders. It's because the government cut back its support, and so to that degree, I agree with the caller.
Part of this chart that we're showing our viewers looks at government jobs. The yellow line on this chart is federal jobs. Over the years from 1960 onward, you can see a fall off since 2007, 2008. But Daniel Mitchell, your thoughts on where these public sector jobs fit into the job creation picture?
Here's something that I think June missed. Any government sector job has to be financed by somebody producing something in the private sector. So the more we add more government jobs, that puts a bigger and bigger burden on the productive sector of the economy, because somebody has to pay for it. You can't consume what is not first produced. And if you look around the world again, this is my mantra about the world being a laboratory. If government jobs were some sort of magic elixir to create economic growth and prosperity, why is Greece in the economic toilet? Why are France and Spain and all these other European welfare states in so much trouble? Government spending in and of itself is a cost. It's not a stimulus, because somebody has to produce the resources before government spends them.
A question from Dee on Twitter. Please explain why the president seeks another trade deal when we have lost so many jobs due to outsourcing.
I think free trade is a good thing, and I'm glad that the president is at least moving in the direction of some bigger opening of trade markets. American exports support millions of jobs. Free trade is good, whether it's free trade between Oklahoma and Kansas, whether it's between California and New York, whether it's free trade between me and my local supermarket. I have a big trade deficit with my supermarket. They never buy anything from me. I'm always buying groceries from them. What we want is a free market where producers and consumers can decide what's best for themselves, free from the burdens of government. Now, here's something, though, where we can make a big difference. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, bar none. We have a higher corporate tax rate than France. So all these welfare states in Europe, our corporate tax rate is higher. And we have a worldwide taxation system on top of that. So American companies trying to compete in foreign markets really have a big millstone around their neck. So I think there are all sorts of things we could do to make America a much more competitive place, to create jobs, to increase our exports, and to make our economy much more competitive. So I want to do things. I just don't think bigger government is the answer. I think less government.
Ross Eisenbray.
Well, our trade regime has been pretty much a failure for the last 15 years. We had NAFTA and lost hundreds of thousands of jobs because of it. Manufacturing jobs are down 4 or 5 million since NAFTA was passed. Then we have the World Trade Organization letting China in, and from 2000 on, our manufacturing sector just tanked. So literally, we lost 5 million jobs, and much of that went to China. Probably on the order of 3 million jobs went from U.S. manufacturers moving their operations, or companies like Walmart importing back to the United States from China. So these trade deals, it's sort of the definition of insanity. If you keep doing the same thing, you're going to keep getting the same result. And when you have a $500 billion trade deficit, you need to do something different. That is the single most important thing we can do to restore the American economy, is to balance our trade and get to a position where we're producing for our own market and exporting to the rest of the world in balance with what comes into the United States in imports.
And I should note, as we're talking about job creation in the United States, we're going to have a special line in this segment for about the next 45 minutes or so here on the Washington Journal for those who are in part-time or unemployed. Part-time or unemployed viewers, special line for you, 202-585-3883. We'll make sure to get to a few of those calls this morning. Otherwise, Republicans, Democrats, and Independents, standard lines are open to you. And we'll go to our line for Democrats. Michael is in New York. New York, good morning, Michael. You're on with Ross Eisenbray of the Economic Policy Institute and Daniel Mitchell of the Cato Institute.
Good morning, gentlemen. First of all, I'd like to say that I agree with Mr. Eisenbray. And the reason I'm saying that is everyone speaks about the XL pipeline and creating something like 40,000 jobs. But I would argue that if we were to focus on our infrastructure, our railroads, our roads, our bridges, that creates millions of jobs. But Congress fails to do anything about that, because that would make Obama seem like he's doing something great towards jobs. But they fail to do that. And I have one question for Mr. Mitchell. Why in the past have we given big businesses tax breaks after tax breaks to create jobs, and they created zero jobs?
Mr. Mitchell.
Well, I'll agree with you on that last point. I want a simple and fair flat tax. I want to get rid of the thousands of special deductions, credits, exemptions, exclusions, and other loopholes in the tax code. I hate the fact that big businesses are prowling the halls of Congress looking for special handouts and bailouts and preferences. I want businesses to be free from government, but I don't want them dependent on government. I want them concentrating their energies on creating products and services that consumers want. I want them to view that as the way to get profits. I don't want them to view somehow working Congress as a way to getting profits. I want real capitalism, not crony capitalism. Now, the first part of your question about infrastructure, I'll just go back to what I said before. Somebody has to pay for all that. So if government is taxing and borrowing money out of the private sector to pay for infrastructure, you better make sure that you're getting a decent rate of return on that. In some cases, the answer is yes. But in other cases, if you're a bunch of politicians doing pork barrel projects for their cronies and campaign contributors, then the rate of return is going to be very low, which is why I think we'll get better infrastructure if we get the federal government out of it and let state and local governments raise the money and spend the money, because they actually know what's in the best interest of the motorists and the commuters in their states and districts. Whereas the federal government, that's where you get all the pork and all the corruption.
That tax structure that you were explaining just now, who on Capitol Hill is pushing a tax structure similar to the vision that you just outlined?
Well, the flat tax and other forms of tax reform have not been exactly a hot topic. Obama is much more in the class warfare approach to taxation, and everyone knows there'd be no point in pushing a flat tax when it would just get vetoed by the White House. That being said, Senator Shelby of Alabama has been the longtime supporter or the introducer of a flat tax, and I think Congressman Michael Burgess of Texas is the House member who is the lead sponsor of the flat tax. But unfortunately, these ideas are dormant right now. There are about 30 countries around the world that have a flat tax. Places like Hong Kong have had a flat tax for 6 decades. It's doing very well. They grow fast. But we are saddled with an internal revenue code that's an embarrassment to the human race.
On our free trade question from earlier, Kevin Denver writes in, fair trade, yes. Free trade, no. These trade agreements have killed the middle class. We've got a special line in this segment of the Washington Journal set up for those who are part-time employed or unemployed. Peter's waiting on that line in Lowell, Massachusetts. Peter's an independent. Peter, good morning.
Good morning. I'd like to make a comment about where government's spending money. And theoretically, the speaker, I don't know your name, from the Cato Institute. You're right.
Mr. Mitchell.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mitchell. If you're taking money from the work, the people who are making it, and overdoing jobs, it's going to fail. It's obvious. But when you look at it realistically, when the banks get bailed out, and that's from taxpayer money, so you got to, sometimes you're not given the whole picture. And when you get Harvard does a study, and this 10 years war is going to cost our country $4 trillion by the time you're done paying all the benefits to the soldiers over 30 years. If we took that money and we put it into the factories to make fuel-efficient homes, businesses, and cars, we'd be the leader in the world. Think about that, $4 trillion. And that's a huge part of why this is energy. That's my personal opinion, why these wars were important or done. And when you have welfare in terms, when you're giving it to all these defense contractors that should be put into production, what does that do? It creates havoc. It doesn't build anything. We're not building any. If we built things, we wouldn't need to have all this security apparatus.
I'll let you both respond to this. We'll start with Mr. Mitchell, and then we'll go to Mr. Eisenbray.
Well, I think my friend from Massachusetts will be very happy to know that the Cato Institute was against the bailouts for the big boys on Wall Street. We did not support that at all. We wanted those big banks and big financial institutions to be wound down. Capitalism without bankruptcy is like religion without hell. And I want the big boys on Wall Street to play by the same rules as folks on Main Street. And you'll also be happy to know the good thing, I get to work at the Cato Institute. We're a libertarian think tank. We're not Republican. We don't want bailouts for defense contractors. We don't want to waste money on the defense budget. We support less domestic spending, and we support less defense spending. We didn't want to go into a big nation-building exercise in Iraq. So I think you'll find that we have a lot of agreement. I would invite you to go to the cato.org website and see that the libertarian principles of small government across the board are the best for the economy, growth, and job creation.
Mr. Eisenbray.
Well, I think there's a little bit of agreement here. I think that we are overspending on defense, but I think I want to go back to what Dan said about the infrastructure and about our highway system. He wants to get the federal government out of the highway program, get the federal government out of airports and out of ports and out of sewage treatment. It's like there's no history involved in an attitude like that, I have to say. The railroads were built by the federal government. The national highway system was built by the federal government. In fact, most of the roads in the United States that were paved for the first time in the New Deal. There is no way to have a nation of 300 million plus and not have the federal government overseeing the infrastructure of the whole system. And I just think that it's unrealistic.
Mr. Mitchell's talked a bit about what the Cato Institute does. Can you talk about the Economic Policy Institute?
Well, we focus on wages and incomes, employment, mostly analyzing them and developing policies to help working people, the middle class. We have worked very closely with the Congressional Progressive Caucus on a budget that does some of the things that the caller just now asked for, that would reduce spending on defense, put more money into infrastructure, more money into education and research and the health of the American people. And it would raise taxes on the very wealthy. We have a serious problem when all of the growth, virtually all of the growth in the of income since 2009 has gone to the top 1% of Americans, and they really haven't been taxed on that income. A flat tax sounds like a good idea, but when all of the income growth is going to a tiny slice of the American people, not to tax that with a progressive tax would be disastrous for the government and for equality.
We've talked about quite a few job creation initiatives so far in this segment of the Washington Journal, but I want to talk about job training in particular and get to some of the news from last week. Speaking Wednesday at a community college in Allegheny West Hills in Oakdale, Pennsylvania, President Obama proposed two different proposals that are initiatives that don't require congressional approval. Here's a bit of what the president had to say about partnering with community colleges and local employers to come up with job-driven curriculums.
Or to wait. So today I'm taking two significant actions that don't require Congress. That don't require Congress. First, we've asked more community colleges to do what you've done here at Allegheny, and that is to figure out what skills local employers are looking for, and then partner with them to help design the curriculums and to prepare the students for those jobs. We want a seamless progression from community college programs to industry-recognized credentials and credit towards a college degree. And today, I'm announcing that we're going to award nearly $500 million to those institutions who are doing it best in all 50 states, using existing money to create opportunity for hard-working folks like you.
Mr. Mitchell, I wanted to start with you, with your reaction to some of the announcements the president made at that event.
The Government Accountability Office estimated that there are currently 47 different job training programs. Okay, now it's going to be 49. But more importantly than that, GAO found that when you look at the track record of these government programs, and you look at the people who went through the programs compared to a control group of people who didn't go through the programs, you don't find any improvement in getting jobs or in the wages that people receive once they do get jobs. So I think this is just another example of a feel-good government program. Let's spend money. Let's try to buy votes. Let's make it look like when you're a politician, let's make voters think that we're doing something. I would much rather President Obama and congressional Republicans, I don't care about the parties in this, I would much rather have them figure out ways of lowering the tax burden, making it easier for companies to grow, making job creation more profitable. I mean, that's where we get into things like the minimum wage. If you had the government say it's now going to cost you more to hire someone, who on earth would think that would create jobs? Or when Obamacare says when you hire people or when your business gets to a certain size, you then have thousands upon thousands of dollars of mandates and costs. I mean, it all adds up. It's like straws on a camel's back. And when you're a business out there, I mean, you're trying, especially as a small business, you're trying to survive. You're trying to make sure the business keeps going. You're thinking about the long term. You're putting in, the blood, sweat, and blood equity of your time and energy, not to mention your family life savings. And the government, instead of sort of staying out of your way, is putting all these burdens in front of you in terms of the taxes, the regulations, Obamacare, minimum wages. It all adds up. And again, if we make our economy more like the French and Greek economy, we're not going to get different results. We're going to get the same bad results in terms of stagnation and weak job performance.
Mr. Eisenberg, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, but also to respond to House Speaker John Boehner. His office released a video touting the Republican House-passed Skills Act in response to the president's speech. We'll play what Speaker Boehner had to say and then come back to you.
Okay.
Times are tough for hardworking people, and Republicans are working to turn things around. Right now, there are roughly 10.5 million Americans looking for work, yet 4 million job openings remain unfilled. Experts attribute this to a skills gap. Every year, taxpayers spend $18 billion on job training problems. but only a fraction of workers receive the training necessary to get a job. What's more, our job training system hasn't been updated since before the dot-com bubble burst. Now it's time to close the gap, empower our students and workers, provide them with opportunities to get ahead. That's why, as just one part of a larger jobs plan, Republicans have passed the Skills Act, which will help give workers the job training they need when they need it. To read the bill and learn more about how Republicans are helping close the gap, go to speaker.gov/jobs.
And that was from the Speaker's office. That, of course, wasn't the Speaker's voice in the voiceover there, but Ross Eisenbray, your thoughts?
Well, our job training system has not been very successful. I agree with Dan and GAO. I think it depends on where you go in the country. Part of the problem is it was broken up into the 50 states. It's a program that works better, for example, in Washington State than it does probably in Mississippi and some other places. You can't talk about it really as a single system because it's run by the states and by local boards. It is a fractured kind of system. I don't like it very much. I think the Republican Skills Act is just politics. It's just a slogan, really. The systems that work, I mean, Dan talks about Europe. He doesn't talk about Germany, which is a big government country that has a fabulous training program, an apprenticeship program that all businesses pay into. It works so well that they don't have any talk about skills gaps over there. The Nordic countries also have a much bigger share of the government. Dan somehow doesn't mention them when he talks about Greece, which actually had a smaller share of its economy devoted to welfare than Germany does. What you need is effective government. You need a system where all businesses pay in, where they carry their weight so that businesses aren't afraid about training somebody and then having another business poach them. That's why American business isn't investing as much in training as, for example, the Germans do. If everybody paid in, there'd be no benefit to somebody just poaching another company's workers.
We've got about 20 minutes left with Ross Eisenbray of the Economic Policy Institute and Daniel Mitchell of the Cato Institute. Want to get to your calls as we talk about the best way to create jobs in the United States. Let's go to Dale, waiting in Albuquerque, New Mexico, on our line for Independence. Dale, good morning.
Good morning. I agree completely with Mr. Eisenberry. I'm a sheet metal worker, a retired sheet metal worker, and when we did in the sheet metal workers, what all the companies did, or all the companies in the trade crafts, all the companies would be kicking in to the apprenticeship program, and we'd be training young people, kids behind us, to fill these positions, and we would train them in the job so they can come out and do that. That's exactly what Mr. Roman is talking about. That's exactly what we should be doing. We should have been doing a long time ago. Right now, there is no skin in the game for companies that just want the federal government to train our people. The companies have to start kicking in a little extra if they want to train workforce. So instead of trying to send these people overseas, when they put money in the game and help us out in America, then the entire economy comes up because you're going to hire from within. A lot of these companies, they want to get people from overseas and this and that. Hey, if I'm an employer and I train you as an apprentice, I'm going to keep you and work with you because I have money I am invested in you. Trying to get the government to send a guy to college or a trade school, I have nothing invested in you, so I don't need you.
Dale talking about his experience in Albuquerque, New Mexico. We also have a line this morning set up for part-time workers or unemployed workers. James is waiting on that line in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. James, good morning.
Good morning to you all.
Go ahead.
I'm calling in on an unemployment part-time worker because of the situation in North Carolina is terrible. Because we have a governor, his name is Pat McCrory. He vetoed or will not even accept the health care money. We got people unemployed and don't have insurance, and then they want to have no insurance. And you take the Republican Party, They have stopped or blocked every program that this president has put forward for political reasons. Why do you think they're doing that? See, like they are worse than Harris. They are destroying the whole country. We can't let them know more. They should realize that. They're destroying. They don't care what happens to the people of the United States of America as long as they can block this president.
Daniel Mitchell, the caller, concerned about gridlock on Capitol Hill and some of these job creation proposals.
Well, 2 points. First, in general, I think gridlock is a good thing. We got some very good results for the country in terms of an increase in economic freedom during the Clinton years. So the combination of a Democrat White House and a Republican Congress worked out pretty well. And also, if you look at the job numbers and the charts that you were showing earlier, once Republicans took over Congress and we got gridlock, I think the job numbers have been much better since that time than they were in 2009 and 2010 when it was all Obama, Pelosi, and Reid. So I think there's a lot to be said for gridlock because it means one party doesn't have all the power, which, of course, with government, when politicians have a lot of power, they tend to abuse it. But then the other point I think is important for the caller, because he was complaining about the situation in North Carolina. North Carolina, according to the Tax Foundation, had the worst tax system of all southern states. They did a big tax reform. It was either late 2012 or it was 2013. But that reform, I think, is going to pay dividends along with some of the other things that have happened in North Carolina. So, you know, maybe 2 years from now, we should all come back and look at what's happened in North Carolina. But I think you're going to see some pretty good results that are going to improve the business climate, the ability for companies to create jobs in North Carolina. So I would be hopeful that things will pick up for you down there.
Twitter questions for each of you. Mr. Eisenbray first. Sandy Beach asks, why are all of your job growth policies centered only on union jobs? Unions represent less than 6% of all jobs.
Well, I haven't said anything about unions. The infrastructure jobs would be mostly in the construction industry, although there are transport jobs and manufacturing jobs that go along with building roads and railroads and so forth. The construction industry is, what, maybe 25% or no more than that unionized. So 3 out of 4 jobs would be with non-union workers. I really think the question is misguided.
And to look at construction jobs, the charts showing construction jobs starting in January 2008 through February 2014, showing that those construction jobs still not really recovered.
That's right. We're still down about 1 million construction jobs right now.
Mr. Mitchell, the Twitter question for you. Joe asked, less regulation? Are you priming for another Wall Street bailout? Lack of regs was the direct cause.
I'm afraid I have to disagree with the premise of the question. I think it was the easy money policy by the Fed combined with the corrupt system of subsidies for the government-created Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac that created the excess liquidity, then sort of tilted it, the playing field, so it sloshed into housing, and we got the bubble. And, of course, the private sector did play a role. A lot of the Wall Street banks sort of, tried to go in for the ride. But that's precisely why I think they should have been allowed to go under. We should have had them going into receivership, have their assets broken up and sold off. That would have been the smart, responsible thing to do. I want capitalism. I don't want cronyism.
Let's go to Jerry waiting in Kingsport, Tennessee on our line for Independence. Jerry, good morning. You're on with Ross Eisenbray and Daniel Mitchell.
Good morning, guys. The solution to this jobs problem, bringing it back to the United States, is very, very simple. It can originate with we the people. If we the people held our elected officials to what they swore to do, which is uphold the Constitution, the problem would be solved because Congress has the right and the authority in Article 1 to regulate trade and tariff. Now then, if we bring the tariffs up for the imported goods to where they're equal to the in United States manufactured goods, just plain and simple, the economists that agree with me and what I'm saying range from Joseph Stiglitz to Paul Craig Roberts to Ron Paul, and y'all probably don't recognize Ron Paul as an economist, but he's more knowledgeable on it than a whole lot of these flukes running around out here. Anyhow, I'll hang up and wait for your guys' answers. Appreciate the information.
Mr. Eisenbray, I'll let you take that one.
Well, I think our problem is a little different. I think the problem is that the dollar is overvalued, and it makes our goods more expensive in foreign markets. It makes imported goods cheaper than they should be because our dollar is so strong. It's so overvalued. Now, the reason that is partly because countries like China and Korea and many others around the world, even Denmark, buy U.S. currency to raise the value of the dollar against their own currency. So I don't think we need to address that with tariffs. I think that we could do what the Bush administration, Reagan administration did actually in 1987 and reach an accord with our trading partners to stop doing that, lower the value of the dollar, and I think that we could probably create a couple of million jobs here in 2 or 3 years by that one simple process.
Staying in Tennessee for a second, we'll go to Jonah, who writes in over email from Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Mr. Mitchell, I'll give you this question. Huge profits do not seem to be trickling down. How about letting a higher minimum wage and jobs in new infrastructure percolate up?
Well, if a minimum wage is such a great idea, why don't we set it at $50 or $100 an hour? Even then, I suspect Ross would agree that that's going to hurt jobs, so that we simply have then an empirical question: at what level is the job creation damage less, and at what point is it too heavy? Look, let's get back to the bottom line. As I said earlier in the program, businesses create jobs when it's profitable to create jobs. We may think that's bad, we may think that they should create jobs out of the goodness of their heart, but I'm just focusing on reality because I'm looking at the bottom line. I want more job creation and prosperity in America, and that's only going to happen when businesses think it's profitable to hire more workers, create more jobs, and I think that the Europeanization of the American economy with more taxes, more spending, more regulation is just the wrong approach. I'd rather us copy the countries that are having good economic performance, not the ones that are doing poorly.
I'm going to let Mr. Eisenbray jump in here, but I want you to respond to this headline in this Bloomberg piece. Highest minimum wage state, Washington, beats the U.S. in job creation is the headline. Just a little bit from that story, I want to get your thoughts. When Washington residents voted in 1998 to raise the state's minimum wage and link it to the cost of living, opponents warned that the measure would be a job killer, Bloomberg writes. But the prediction hasn't borne out. In the 15 years that followed, the state's minimum wage climbed to $9.32. Meanwhile, job growth continued at an average of 0.8% annual pace. That's 0.3% above the national rate. How do you account for those numbers?
I imagine it has to do with cost of living in different regions of the country. You're going to have a much different effect if you have put that kind of minimum wage in effect in, say, Tennessee, which is a more low-cost state than in Washington State or, say, New York City. And actually, I like the idea of getting minimum wage policy out of Washington and let the states, let's have 50 different experiments on what the right approach is on this type of legislation. I think you would find a much better outcome if states were responsible for this type of policy than the politicians here in Washington.
Mr. Eisenbray.
Well, of course, the states are responsible, and they can do. Every state can do what Washington State did and raise its minimum above the federal level. I agree with you. There is a right federal level or a range that's appropriate. I think it's way too low right now, and the president's $10.10 proposal makes a lot of sense. Now, we really do have a disagreement about how the economy works. I agree with people like Nick Hanauer, who says job creators are not people with a lot of money. People with a lot of money are just rich, and they don't create jobs unless there's demand. If people need goods and services, if they have the money to buy goods and services, they will be provided by people who can make a profit from it. But if people, for example, are in the bottom 20% of income and haven't seen a raise in 15 or 20 years, they aren't going to be able to buy things. Their purchasing power will be so reduced that they can't contribute to economic growth. And so that's why things like the minimum wage are important. It's why putting a lot of people back to work and getting money in their pockets so that they can spend it will be good for business and the entire economy.
Only have about 10 minutes left in this roundtable with Ross Eisenbray of the Economic Policy Institute and Daniel Mitchell of the Cato Institute. Let's go to James waiting in Gillette, Wyoming on our line for Independence. James, good morning.
Morning. You know, I agree with both sides, but at the same time, I do disagree. I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that if businesses, you know, would put cap on every single job for every worker, because it seems like nowadays companies require you to have a college education, and most people that don't have a college education are just as good at working jobs as people that do have a good education. And I do think, you know, that would save a lot, and it would actually help out the whole tax inflation and everything at the end.
Mr. Mitchell, do you want to jump in on that comment?
I think I agree, if I understand. A lot of companies do use a college degree as a proxy for, okay, is this person educated and intelligent? But of course, that's not necessarily the same as being educated and intelligent. And unfortunately, one of the reasons why they use a college degree as a proxy is because they're not allowed to use other measures. They might wind up getting hit with EEOC lawsuits and regulations. And so the government has sort of forced them into using a college degree as a proxy, even though, as we both agree, it's not really a good way of determining who's a good productive worker.
We've got that special line this morning for those who are part-time workers or unemployed. Mark is waiting on that line from Torrington, Connecticut. He's an independent. Mark, good morning.
Good morning. How you doing?
Good. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to make a point that I attended a WIA training session to drive a trailer truck 2 years ago, and I have been unable to find any employment in Connecticut because the corporations require you to have experience, and I've been told that the insurance companies are behind the requirement that they that the drivers have the experience, and I mean so that they're not on the same page with the training programs that are being provided.
Mr. Eisenberg, do you want to jump in?
Well, I think that's an example of where the government could do a better job. To train somebody for a job that they're not going to be able to take doesn't make sense. Getting you and people like you experience, having a program where you could drive for the Postal Service or somebody would obviously it would take care of that insurance problem. I've never actually heard of this problem before, but my heart goes out to you. To get that kind of training and then not find a job is pretty tough.
In some of the time we have left here, I want to focus on the subject of long-term unemployment. Here's the numbers from the latest BLS report that came out earlier this month. 3.7 million listed as long-term unemployed. That's not much changed from February. It's down by 837,000 over the year. 35.8% of the unemployed population meets the definition of long-term unemployed. Here's a story from yesterday's Washington Post talking about work being elusive for the long-term jobless. Just two paragraphs from that. New research tracking people who have been out of work for 6 months or longer found that 23% of them landed a job within a few months of the study. But a year later, more than a third of that group was unemployed again or out of the labor force. The story notes that the long-term unemployed could become a permanent underclass left behind by the nation's broader economic recovery, citing several economists over the course of that story. I want to talk to Daniel Mitchell about that issue and the trap of long-term unemployment.
I think it's something we have to worry about. If you have growth of 1.5% to 2.2%, which is what we've been having and what we're projected to have, that creates a lot fewer jobs than the historical average growth of 3%, which is what America has experienced for decades upon decades. So if we have permanently lower growth, we're going to have permanently lower job creation. And of course, the more marginal workers with fewer skills, they're going to be the ones most victimized by that. I think Ross and I would both agree that the best outcome would be to have good, strong, healthy growth with tight labor markets. And we had that back during the Clinton years. So I'm not here to make any partisan points. I give Reagan credit. I give Clinton credit. Some presidents preside over policies that liberalize the economy and enable faster growth. And that faster growth creates the tight labor markets, which means the marginal workers who are most in need of better economic opportunity, they get stronger outcomes from that. But then we get to the big fundamental debate. I think we get that faster growth and those tighter labor markets with policies of free markets and smaller government, and Ross has the different perspective. And that's fundamentally, I think, what our whole fight is about.
Mr. Eisenberg, your perspective.
Well, you know, these people are a huge resource. We've invested education. A lot of the people who are long-term unemployed are not, you know, unskilled people. They're bookkeepers, they're technicians, they're, you know, computer programmers and people with a lot of skills. So why are we wasting, as a nation, you know, 3.5 million of them are long-term unemployed, but all of these 10.5 million people, why are we wasting their resources when they could be put to work, they want to work, and they could do things that everybody agrees need to be done? For example, in Detroit and many distressed communities, we have buildings that are empty that should be torn down. The local government doesn't have money to do it. Why doesn't the federal government have a program like the one that Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky proposed, where you would have a corps of people hired in different cities around the country to address those problems? People could be put to work. We have, you know, among these millions of people are people with health care skills who could be put to work providing services to communities that don't have any services now. There is plenty of work to do, and we have plenty of skilled people to do it. Among the unemployed, we just need to find a way to get them back into the economy.
One chart from the New York Times showing the long-term unemployment situation. This chart noting that short-term employment is below pre-recession levels. That would be this chart on the left here. But medium and especially long-term unemployment are still higher for those who are unemployed 27 weeks or over. It's up 191% from pre-recession levels. That's that final chart on the right there. Just time for a few more calls. Let's go to Jesse waiting in Darlington, South Carolina, on our line for Republicans. Jesse, good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead, sir.
I just wanted to say, you know, what I'm not happy about, like, for example, I have DirecTV, and I'm paying $112 a month to watch TV, and I'm told by the corporate company they worry about their stockholders more than they do the customers, just like grocery stores and all these other places. And, you know, higher and higher prices, and you talk about raising the minimum wage. Well, what's that going to do? That's going to just have inflation on groceries, gas, all these different things. If things were a lot lower and stop worrying about the stockholders so much and worry about us, we could create our own jobs, because we have part-time people working in grocery stores instead of full-time because they're not moving the products off the shelf because it's so high.
That's Jesse in Darlington, South Carolina. And we'll get in Edward in Jersey City, New Jersey on our line for Independence. Edward, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. Is it?
Go ahead, Edward.
Oh, okay. Good morning. Mr. Eisenberg, I called in 2006 when you were in with William Miller from the Chamber of Commerce. And it was about the economy and politics. And I was saying I would never vote Democrat ever again. I would never vote Republican. But I feel like with all the obstruction in Congress from the GOP, we'll never know what the American jobs bill is that the president has asked them to go through and sign for us. I don't know why the GOP is having this all-out assault on public jobs. There's no jobs in my city here in Jersey City. Our local newspaper prints only like 5 jobs. There are no jobs. There are no apprenticeship programs for training for us. I don't know what we're going to do. We're stuck with these two political parties, and there's seemingly no way out. Thank you.
That was Edward from Jersey City. Mr. Eisenberg, I'll let you give your last thoughts before we go to Mr. Mitchell.
Well, you know, I'm unhappy with the political situation, too. I think that there are clear solutions that we're not addressing, but you can see why. We have a very different view in one party and another. The views I've been expressing are pretty much in line with Democratic politicians, and Dan's are more in line with Republicans. And if you really think that the government can't help, that the best thing the government can do is to get out of the way, then you know, you're not going to get help from the government. And I think that that's the wrong way to go, that there are things that we can do to put people to work building things that the nation needs, providing services to people that the nation needs. The government can get involved in our trade problem rather than passing more trade deals like the Korea Free Trade Agreement that cost 40,000 jobs in the first year and 70,000 over 2 years. We could have balanced trade if we addressed our currency problems, and we could thereby put millions of people back to work. So I think there are direct, good policies that could be adopted, and we just don't have a Congress that will do it.
Mr. Mitchell.
Well, I think having a call from New Jersey to close things up is very opportune for me, because New Jersey is the third highest tax state in the nation. So is it any surprise that job creation in New Jersey is lagging? Chris Christie talks a lot, but so I don't know whether it's his fault. I don't know whether it's the state legislature's fault. But when you have a very high state tax rate, when you have a burden of government spending that is far higher than the national average, not to mention the fact that whatever New Jersey's congressman in Washington, New Jersey sends a lot more money to Washington than it gets back. So big government in Washington is bad for New Jersey. Big government in New Jersey is bad for New Jersey. So of course you're not getting a lot of jobs created there. And that's sort of my fundamental concluding message. We don't want big government if we want a healthy, prosperous private sector. As I said before, the world is a laboratory, and that laboratory shows we're much better off if we copy Hong Kong and Singapore, and we'll be much worse off if we copy France, Spain, Italy, and Greece.
Dan Mitchell is a senior fellow with the Cato Institute, that's cato.org, and Ross Eisenberg is the vice president of the Economic Policy Institute, that's EPA.org. Appreciate the discussion this morning. I'm sorry, EPA, API.org. Sorry about that. Thanks to you both for joining us this morning on the Washington Journal.